My name is Sarah, and I was born in a small town where life was simple but full of struggles. My parents were both very strict and had high expectations of me. Growing up, I always felt the pressure to be perfect. They wanted me to excel in everything, from school to household chores, and they had little patience for my mistakes. My father, in particular, was always hard on me. He never showed any affection, and his love was conditional on my achievements. Every time I failed at something, I could feel the disappointment in his eyes, and that was the hardest part for me. My mother, though caring, was often too scared to stand up to my father. She would always tell me to just focus on my studies, and everything would be okay. But things were never that simple. As I grew older, the weight of their expectations began to crush me. I became a quiet, obedient girl, always trying to please them. I wanted their approval, their love, but no matter how hard I tried, it never felt enough. The feeling of being constantly judged, of never being good enough, was unbearable. When I turned 16, my life took a drastic turn. I was introduced to Daniel, a young man from a nearby town, through a family friend. At first, he seemed like the answer to all my problems. He was kind, respectful, and listened to me. For the first time in my life, someone made me feel valued for who I was, not for what I could do. We began talking more and more, and I soon found myself falling for him. However, my parents did not approve of him. They thought he was from a lower social class and that he wouldn't be able to provide for me in the way they expected. They began to pressure me to stop seeing him, but I couldn't. Daniel made me feel alive again, and I didn't want to let go of that feeling. Despite my parents' objections, I continued seeing Daniel in secret. But it wasn't long before they found out. My father was furious. He yelled at me, calling me a disgrace and accusing me of dishonoring the family. He told me that if I didn't stop seeing Daniel, I would have to leave the house. The thought of leaving my home terrified me, but I couldn't give up on Daniel. One day, my father made a decision for me. He arranged for me to marry someone else, a man I didn't know, but who came from a wealthy family. He said this was the best choice for me, and that it would secure my future. My heart shattered. I didn't love this man, and I couldn't imagine a life with him. But my father was insistent, and I felt powerless to stop him. I was forced into a marriage I didn't want. The wedding was a blur of faces and voices, and all I could think about was Daniel. My new husband, though kind, was not the person I wanted to be with. I couldn't stop thinking about how my life had been completely taken from me. But things didn't stop there. My new husband expected me to be the perfect wife, just as my parents had expected me to be the perfect daughter. He wanted me to stay at home, cook, clean, and take care of the house. There was no room for me to think for myself or pursue my own dreams. For months, I felt trapped in a life I didn't choose. I began to lose myself. I didn't know who I was anymore. I was just a shadow of the person I had once been, and the weight of my regrets and mistakes crushed me even more. It was during this time that I realized something important. I was in control of my life, no matter how much it felt like I wasn't. I began to think about my past, my dreams, and what I really wanted from life. The pressure of my parents, the pain of my marriage, none of it could define who I was unless I allowed it to. As days passed, I realized I couldn't continue living in this state of constant misery. I had to make a change. The first step was to understand that I didn't need anyone's approval to be happy. I didn't have to live according to my father's or society's expectations. I had to learn to value myself, no matter what others thought. I started small. I began to read books, something I had always loved but was forbidden to do growing up. It was in those books that I found a sense of freedom. I would escape into the stories, and for a few hours, I wasn't just Sarah, the girl who was trapped by her past. I was someone else, someone who had the power to shape her own destiny. I also started spending more time with people who supported me. I began to talk to my old friends again, the ones I had lost touch with when my marriage had taken over my life. They reminded me of who I was before all the pressure, before all the expectations. They told me it was okay to be myself, even if that meant breaking free from everything I had known. But my struggle wasn't over. My husband, although kind, couldn't understand why I was changing. He became frustrated and confused. He didn't want me to become independent. He wanted me to stay the same, quiet, obedient, and submissive. He started to resent me for not being the woman he had married, and our relationship grew colder by the day. One evening, as we sat in silence at the dinner table, I realized that I had to make a decision. I had to choose my happiness, even if it meant leaving the marriage. It wasn't easy, but deep inside, I knew it was the right thing to do. I couldn't live a life of regret, constantly wondering what could have been. The next morning, I told my husband that I wanted a divorce. I was scared, but I knew I had no other choice. He didn't take it well, and our conversation ended in anger and tears. But as I walked away from that house, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. For the first time in years, I was free. Free from the chains of my past, free to build a future that was mine. I returned to my parents' house, and they were furious. My father called me a disgrace and refused to speak to me. My mother, though, showed a different side. She didn't approve of my decision, but she understood. She told me that I was strong and that, no matter what, she would always be there for me. It wasn't the love I had hoped for, but it was enough. The next few months were difficult. I had to rebuild my life from scratch. I found a job at a local bookstore, and I began to save money to move out of my parents' house. I spent my evenings reading and learning new skills. It wasn't easy, and I often felt alone, but I was determined to keep going. Then, one day, I received a message from Daniel. After all this time, he still thought about me. He had heard about my divorce and wanted to know how I was doing. I was hesitant at first, unsure if I was ready to face him again. But something inside me told me that it was time to reconnect. We met at a cafe, and when I saw him, all the memories came rushing back. He hadn't changed, and neither had I. We talked for hours, sharing our lives and experiences since we last saw each other. It was then that I realized that while I had been on a journey of self-discovery, so had he. We were both different people now, stronger, wiser, and more independent. And for the first time, I realized that we didn't need each other to complete us. We could be happy on our own. That evening, as we parted ways, Daniel told me something I would never forget. He said, "You've been through so much, Sarah, but you've come out stronger. You've learned how to live for yourself, and that's the most important thing." His words stayed with me, and I understood then that true happiness doesn't come from the approval of others. It comes from within. I had spent so many years trying to live up to other people's expectations, but now I knew that the only person I needed to please was myself. With time, I moved into my own apartment, started a new chapter of my life, and never looked back. I continued to work at the bookstore, and slowly, I began to make new friends, ones who valued me for who I was, not what I could do. I didn't need to be anyone's perfect daughter or perfect wife. I just needed to be Sarah. In the end, I learned that life isn't about avoiding pain or struggles. It's about how we handle them. We all face challenges, but it's in the way we rise above them that defines us. I have come to realize that strength doesn't come from perfection. It comes from learning, growing, and never giving up. I may have lost a lot along the way, but I gained something far more valuable, the knowledge that I am enough. No matter what anyone else thinks, I am enough. To anyone out there going through struggles, remember this. You are not defined by your past, your mistakes, or the expectations of others. You have the power to shape your own future, and no matter how difficult the journey may seem, you can overcome it. Believe in yourself, because you are stronger than you think. And always remember, you are enough.